I'm Sharon Hill. I'm the Director of Arts and Education at the North Carolina Arts Council.
I'm Jeremy Tucker. I'm the Music and Theater Arts Education Consultant here at DPI.
I'm Lisl Valiant. I'm the Outreach Education Coordinator for the Carolina Ballet.
I am Slater Mapp, the Dance and Visual Arts Consultant at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. And Mike?
I'm Mike Wiley. I'm an actor, playwright, producer, director, a bunch of different things. But in the end, I'd like to go around to schools to teach how to do what I do.
Great. And Sarah?
And I'm Sarah Barron, Director of Education at the North Carolina Symphony.
All right. So I'm going to mute Mike and Sarah. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the first question, which is how do teaching artists or institutions partner with schools and school systems? So who would like to start us out? If you're our virtual guest, just raise your hand. And if you're in the room, just wink.
I can begin.
Okay, so we're going to hear from Lisl.
This is Lisl. At Carolina Ballet, our education programs strive to creatively engage students in the learning process through exposure to the world of dance and the magic that is.
Okay. Mike or Sarah, just raise your hand on your computer and I can unmute you. There we go, Sarah. I will unmute Sarah. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Sarah Barron again. We do a whole host of activities, but some of the ways that we partner with schools is by working with teachers to create lesson plans that align with school curriculum. We offer professional development workshops, and in general, we provide inspiration through live performances with living, working musicians.
Perfect. Thanks, Sarah. And I'm going to mute you, and Mike has his hand up, so I'm going to go to Mike Wiley, and Michelle Harrell has just joined us, and we're just on our first question, so this is perfect. We'll go to Mike, and then we'll go to Michelle, and I'll get her caught up. Go ahead, Mike.
This is Mike Wiley, and through the Cartwheels program with the North Carolina Arts Council and my own residencies through my production company, I help teachers teach history and English through theater, as well as exercises, and also the way that I perform theater using audience participation to teach history through participation and also race and where we are currently in America and American history.
Great. Does anybody have anything they'd like to add to that before I go to Michelle? Michelle, we notice that you're here. We're on our first question, which is how do teaching artists or institutions partners with schools or school systems? But what I'll probably get you to do also is just introduce yourself, which we all just did, and I can edit it all back in the proper order. But just introduce yourself, who you are, where you work, and how you're connected with arts education. I see a question, so I'm going to go to that. And I will. Perfect. So let's go down here. And Michelle, please remember, just all you have to do is raise your hand and we will unmute you if you have a question of any of the panelists or if you just need to say something. So Michelle, are you there?
Yes, and I've actually been here for 15 minutes. I'm so sorry, guys. My computer was slow, so I was joining you by phone, and and I am here. So I am Michelle Harrell.
I understand.
And I am
it's the parent drama of the virtual world.
State computers.
State computers.
Okay. Yes, State Computers. Hi, I'm Michelle Harrell, and I'm the Director of Teaching and Learning at the North Carolina Museum of Art. I'm excited to join you today.
Perfect. So, Michelle.
Do you want me to go ahead and answer the question too?
Yes, and two things that I added, and you may have heard this or not, that I thought would come out of the conversation, but I just wanted to make it a little more explicit. And that's how do you create programming in your organization? And then down here a little bit further, maybe what current programs are you working on, or what future programs you might be working on. So the first question where we are right now is just how do teaching artists or institutions partner with schools and school systems?
We have lots of ways that we partner with school systems. One of the ways in which we do that is, of course, all schools can bring field trips. That's a huge amount of the schools that visit us, probably the largest number, about 35,000 a year. And we also have professional development opportunities, teacher workshops, educator expos, and then a year-long immersive experience called a collaborative teacher fellowship. And now we have an alumni of these teacher fellows that have gone through intensive arts integration experiences that we come back to sometimes when we have opportunities for outreach projects across the state. So there's a number of projects that we're working on now as we're looking ahead to this summer. We've got some art and environment projects, both professional development online and on-site workshops. We're also planning an exhibition this fall and featuring some of the teachers from those fellows, a Georgia O'Keeffe exhibition. So some of the teachers are working now with their students with O'Keeffe, and we're going to be able to showcase some of their work in the exhibition.
Great. All right. So, yes, of course. Sharon?
Yeah, if I may, on that particular question, I'd like to just state, too, that the North Carolina Arts Council education portion also supports the relationship between teaching artists and schools through offering grant support for residencies, workshops. We also facilitate different trainings and just connections between community organizations and the schools. And I think the interesting part of this question is that teaching artists function in so many different ways. They function as educators, they function as trainers for teachers, and they also often are mentors and role models as to what quality arts education looks like to schools that might not have that in depth.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right, we're going to move down to the next question, unless anybody needs to raise their hand in the virtual world out there, Michelle or Mike or Sarah, to add to our previous question. But now we're going to get into how do you create programming. So Mike is a playwright and a teaching artist, and so he probably has a certain method, and certainly Michelle and Sarah and Lisl all sort of go about this maybe in slightly different ways. And people who are also listening right now might be responsible for creating programming, whether you're with an arts council or another institution in North Carolina. So who would like to start? I'm getting really good at my wait time. I hear that's a thing that teachers do.
I can start.
Okay, Lisl. Great.
This is Lisl. We have several wonderful programs at Carolina Ballet that are both grant funded as well as fee based. We have our program Dancers in Schools, where we have two of our professional dancers present a 45-minute presentation for grades 1 through 5, where they talk about their journey in becoming a dancer and what it is to be a professional dancer. They also integrate healthy living for the students, and that's been a huge success. That is fee-based. We bring schools into our student matinees. One which is very popular is the Nutcracker, and that is a fee-based field trip. It's also free as part of a scholarship program, and that's great in inspiring children to perhaps participate in dance in their community. We have Stories in Motion, which is a literacy program that serves kindergarten through second grade students throughout the summer months. And that is grant funded. And currently we are in pre-K special needs classrooms in the Wake County community. And that is facilitated by an award that we received, a VSA Education Award from the Kennedy Center. This is the third year Carolina Ballet has received that, and that has had immense success in the special needs classrooms.
And what's the process? I know you've been at the ballet now for a little bit less than a year, and you probably inherited in many of these programs. But how are they? What would like a new program? How would that come about at the Carolina Ballet?
Sure, we have two wonderful teaching artists, Lauren Youngman and Heather Pike, who have been working with the Carolina Ballet for over 6 years now, and they bring their expertise and experience to Carolina Ballet and certainly implement new programs according to the needs that they see within the classrooms. It's an ever-changing process, I think, to be very hands-on and see what the needs are as our society develops and children develop.
Yes. Yep, and North Carolina is a growing state, and so that creates different kinds of demands, I imagine, in different areas. So Sarah or Mike or Michelle in the virtual world, just raise your hand and you can contribute to this idea of how do you go about creating your programs for the kids that you work with. All right, Mike, I see your hand first, so I am unmuting you. Go ahead, Mike.
This is Mike Wiley. So I started doing this about 18 years ago because I saw a growing need in schools and communities and classrooms for African American history, somewhere I could fit in to be a supplement to what teachers from grade 2 to 12 were teaching in their classrooms as far as African American history is concerned. And at that time, in 2000, I saw that I was certainly a supplement to what they were teaching about civil rights, about slavery, about the Black Power movement, Reconstruction, and so on. But now here in 2018, I found in the last several years that I am the entire meal. And so I've restructured what I do from the stage to the classroom and blending them both so that students are getting not only history lessons, but they are involving themselves in the history while learning about it and then learning to write their own stories. I find that students are a little unwilling to write about things that are outside of their world, but are more than willing to write about themselves and their own histories. And so blending American history and their own histories has become effective in the workshops and residencies that we do.
Great, Mike. I always appreciate a good food metaphor. So it sounds like maybe you were doing an appetizer or an amuse-bouche before, and now maybe a meal.
Certainly so. That is the truth.
So I'm curious, like how do you, as an individual, as opposed to like an institution, how do you come up with a new program or a new twist on an old program? What's that process like for you?
Well, oftentimes that happens on the ground before stepping into the school, or it happens in the teacher workshop or in the months ahead of visiting a particular school, because oftentimes a particular school or county will say, yes, we want you to come and pay a visit and work with our students. But recently we had an incident, and fill in the blank, or we have some students, and this happens more often than you would imagine, or we don't have any African American teachers or professionals in our building. and therefore we are attempting to expose our students to a world or a way of life or a history or simply a culture that they have only seen on, say, television or have only heard on the radio. This happens deep in the mountains more often than you would think. And so therefore, my partner, Howard Kraft, who is a playwright and a poet, and I go into the school or into the schools in a particular community, and first we listen to them. We listen to what they need. We never try and come in and perhaps be a square peg in a round hole. We do everything we can to listen to what the teachers need and work ourselves into being flexible into what the community, whether that community is the school, whether that community is a particular classroom, or whether that community is the actual county at large, and we work ourselves into what they need as opposed to what we perceive that they might need, and therefore it becomes a win-win for everybody.
Right. So, we're all familiar with the saying, the medium is the message, but increasingly in the arts and in education, the person is the message, and they bring their culture, they bring their background, they bring their history, and it sounds like you're aware of that, but you're also interacting with other people and listening first and creating some sort of almost like handmade programming for individual systems.
It is. There are set parameters and programs that we bring into the schools, i.e. Using English and writing skills and figurative language skills to create poems or poetry about themselves and about their lives. But if we are told beforehand, and it happens, if we are told beforehand that these students are interested in exploring the environment, or these students are interested in exploring the world around them, i.e. race and culture, we're able to formulate the program there in the moment and recreate it spur of the moment, so that the students are then working in that way and through those structures.
Great. Okay, so Sharon, I think, has something she'd like to add to that.
Yeah, I'd just like to add a comment, because I think you've said that very well, Mike, that the strongest arts exposure programs are not just about going in and performing and leaving. They're about creating relationship and meeting the needs of the students and the schools. And that's what you're describing so well.
Great. All right. I had just muted Mike, and now Michelle has her hand up. So there we go. Michelle, go ahead.
Just to piggyback on Sharon, I think what Mike says about addressing needs is the ideal approach to programming. It's very user-focused, it's human-centered, and I think our challenge, and I know there's many other state organizations on this panel, our challenge is doing that and still having the scale to be able to replicate that on a statewide level. So NCMA often will pilot programs where we're able to address the needs of a small group, or the approach for our online courses has been like a think tank of a small group, and it's very collaborative, very transparent. And the challenge is, how do we continue to meet those individual needs while you increase it from 12 people to 120 people or 1,000 people or whatever else. So I think that's a really interesting thing that he's able to do as an individual that I think more institutions are aspiring to do.
Good point. Thank you, Michelle. All right. Anybody else, just let me know and raise your hand. There we go, Sarah. All right, I see that. So I'm unmuting Sarah. Go ahead.
Hi, Sarah with the symphony again. I'll just, again, sort of echo what everyone has said about really being out there and being able to identify the needs in the community and specific school districts is so important. And as far as creating specific programming on our end, on the artistic side of things, we have a wide variety of people involved in the process. We have staff, conductors, musicians. I'm there to make sure that the lesson plans and curriculum and repertoire is aligning with the standards, which in a lot of cases in the schools is really important to have that element to bring leadership on board within the school district. And then choosing specific pieces for each of our programs. We're really looking at the different elements of music and how individual pieces align with those elements and which pieces can really best demonstrate those elements. And our smaller ensembles really have a chance to interact more with students when they're out in the schools. And so they're creating programs that have a lot of interactive components.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and Lisl would like to add to that. Thank you, Sarah.
This is Lisl from the Carolina Ballet again. One thing I wanted to point out is at Carolina Ballet, some of our programs, our teaching artists will conduct a training session with the teachers in the classrooms that we're about to go into. And this has proven very effective because then the teachers are able to integrate into their daily or weekly curriculum our program that we've presented there. And so it sort of continues the learning process with the children. And that seems to have been very effective.
Oh, that's perfect, because that leads right to the next question is what does an effective or successful partnership look like? What are those things that are required of the institutions, of the people on both sides to sort of make a great partnership for the kids? So our virtual partners may raise their hand and I will get to them, or anybody in the room. Oh, Sharon, go ahead.
Yeah, I can open that discussion a bit because in looking at it in terms of grants that people are soliciting for that type of interaction, the best and the strongest grant projects usually involve a great deal of collaborative planning. And again, that's where the artist, the school, and perhaps another institution are planning together to meet the needs of the teachers and students. We find that the projects that are top down, where you just come in and kind of dump a project into a school or a system, are received, but they don't have that deep impact like Lisl's describing. So we want those teachers to, recognize and express what their needs are for their students, and that will create a base of strength for developing a project.
Great, thank you, Sharon. Anybody want to add to that? Just raise your hand. Sort of what does a successful partnership? Okay, I see your hand, Mike. Mm-hmm. So I will unmute you. Go ahead, Mike.
This is Mike Wiley. I just want to piggyback on what Sharon and Lisl said. Absolutely, going into the schools, going into the community, if it's community partnership, but working with the teachers before even getting into the classrooms to address and even role play in a number of ways with the teachers as far as what's going to take place in the classroom. But not only that, how questions that might arise after we are gone can be addressed, so that the teachers are not only left with answers, but ways to answer questions that may arise after we have exited the building.
That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about leaving with prepared so they can answer questions. So that certainly is going to happen. Michelle, I see your hand, and I'm going to unmute you, and then I will mute Mike. Go ahead, Michelle.
So just continuing that same thread of, the follow-up after the teaching artists have led, we've found Jill Taylor, who runs our Collaborative Teaching Fellowship and Art of Collaboration, has found that we have more impact when teachers self-select than when the principal or the superintendent has, it's come from a top down. But it's very necessary to have that support all the way up as well. So the teachers have to choose and want to be part of this experience, but then they also have to have that support to be able to continue. It's a long-term partnership or continued project.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. So I think the next question is related, which is what roles do teachers play? So I think some people have sort of gotten into that a little bit. So we could very well move on down to the next one, which is what are some stumbling blocks that people or institutions could learn from? So what are some things that maybe without being too specific with counties or schools or people or things like that, but what are some things that we could, lessons learned from your experience or your organization's experience that we could maybe discuss today? This is always the awkward one, but I think often a good one to bring up. Go ahead.
Okay. This is Lisl from the Ballet again. Just quickly, I believe, and what seems to be pretty evident is that certainly with ballet, we don't want to err on the side of where it is like an elitist or intangible art form to the students. Mm-hmm. And that seems to be the stumbling block when we first arrive to schools, that ballet is not tangible to the students. So that's what we sort of work towards in creating a connection to the arts that is easily accessible mm-hmm. to everybody.
Right, and that makes sense just in numbers. We're part of a Arts Ed data project that's going to come out and be released here soon. And many things we discovered were surprising and sort of rich sort of data, but there were also some stories that we sort of expected, and that is that theater and dance is in arts education is just significantly lower in North Carolina. So there might be some specific disciplines that have to sort of bridge some gaps even before they go into schools. And it also depends on what school system you're talking about. Music or visual arts may have to do the same thing depending on what school or county we're talking about. So who else would like to add to the conversation about stumbling products? All right, so just got a little sign that my audio was not good, which means the internet might be a little slow. So hang in there. We're going to hear from Sharon right now.
On a very basic level, one of the stumbling blocks I've encountered over the last few years is that absolute need for continued communication. We've had artists walk into schools and no one remembers they're coming. We've had projects where the artist somehow had some kind of conflict and the school is expecting them and they are not there. So setting up the project is great, planning it is great, but there's got to be continued communication throughout the duration of the whole project.
That's a good point. The best plans in the world don't work if not everybody's there. Right. Absolutely. And that's something I've learned in probably my job here in teaching is it's not just, you can't just expect to send out an email and then everybody understands what to do exactly. It's often several emails and then sometimes a text and then a call and that's okay. We all live very, very busy lives. Mm-hmm. So is there anybody else online who would like to talk potentially about stumbling blocks? Lessons learned that you learned along the way.
Weather's another one.
Weather. Okay, here's Mike. All right, let's see if Mike is going to talk about weather or something else. Hey, Mike, go ahead.
No, I think that Sharon has a really good point. And I just want to flesh that out a little bit and say two things. One, a successful partnership is just that. I know that we live in a world where it's difficult to hold everybody's hand, as you're going into a residency or even just a performance, but making every attempt to hold everyone's hand is really the point. Once the attempt is made, then I think we're all working in the same direction or a similar direction. If there is no attempt at certainly circling up and reaching out, then one component lost may bring everything down. So I've certainly been in schools or communities where a number of teachers don't realize that we might be coming, or once we get there, they may go, "Oh, didn't know you were coming today," or didn't realize that that was this week. We have this closet for you to operate out of, and
right.
And what I see is most helpful in those situations is, I know it sounds simple, is complete flexibility. Complete flexibility in saying, no problem, I can work out of that. I can do that. That's no issue at all. How can we help you in preparing where you didn't realize you didn't need to prepare before?
Great. That's a really nice attitude, Mike. And Lisl would like to add to that.
One thing that I've discovered is a week prior to arriving to classrooms, Carolina Ballet sends out some curriculum material to the teachers to present to their students. And that's a wonderful way to prepare them for our arrival. And it's also sort of a subtle reminder that here we come. So that's worked well for us.
Right. So any other questions or comments about stumbling blocks or roles? All right, well, let's keep on going. I'm always interested in this question, and what you'll find is some of you have already kind of answered this in other questions. So, don't feel like you have to answer this if you've already done so. But what are your goals when working with students? Like, what are those overarching goals that sort of get you through your work? Those touch points that you can sort of go back to when you're planning or when you're implementing or when you're revising? What do you want to accomplish when you're with students? Bueller? Oh, there's Sarah. Hold on. I see Sarah there. I'm going to unmute Sarah. And go ahead, Sarah.
Okay, yes, I will start this one off. I would say overall our goal is to have a positive impact on students, and through a couple of ways, helping to teach the concepts that teachers are already teaching in the classroom. So we're reinforcing those concepts. We're offering students a different way of understanding the material through a live experience. And then also to inspire kids to continue with music. We know that, not every student is going to grow up to become a professional artist or musician, but helping them to realize that music is for everyone and everyone has potential in that area are two goals that we have. And then also just receiving feedback constantly helps us to sort of clarify and tweak what we're doing from year to year, because we do receive state funding, but we're also donor supported and grant funded. So being able to go back to funders with that feedback from teachers and from students is really important.
Yeah, unmute myself. So it's interesting. Like, I'd always thought of that question in terms of like, what are your goals with the students? Like, what do you want the students to be able to do? But you can also certainly have a goal of like a process. Like, we're always going to have feedback in our process so that the kids get the best thing that they can. I think that was a nice point to make. Anybody else? Oh, I see Mike, and then I'll go to Lisl. Here we go. I'm going to unmute Mike, and then I'll go to Michelle after that. So we'll do Mike, and then we'll do Lisl, and then we'll do Michelle. Go ahead, Mike.
Hey, this is Mike. I think giving students a wider understanding of American history and the place of where African American history and their understanding of American history merge. I think leaving them with the understanding that American history, world history, is a quilt, and to take a patch of that quilt out, or to not learn about a particular patch in that quilt of history, leaves just a gaping hole of misunderstanding that could potentially follow them the rest of their lives. Really trying to bring that into our modern culture and understanding of politics and social and even our modern understanding of music and the arts, how understanding all of these things together make us who we are, and not just a fraction of the whole.
That's a beautiful metaphor of the quilt, and just having one patch out of that, what that does to your understanding. That was very well said. Michelle,
I don't just talk about food.
Go ahead.
I said, I don't just talk about food.
That's right. That's right.
No, we don't mind.
Perfect. All right, Lisl, here we go.
Well, I think all of us sitting on the panel today would agree that, our core mission is really to ignite the fire in a future generation for the arts and how it relates to their world every day. And certainly with dance, we all move and on a daily basis, and how movement can help in so many ways. We have a program, Moving Bodies, Learning Minds, that is targeted for kindergarten through second graders. And our teaching artists integrate movement with the core curriculum. Lessons explore the content of math and science and literacy using creative movement based on activities. So really to relate or to integrate art in how it relates to a child's life every day.
Right. Perfect. All righty. So I'm going to unmute Michelle. Michelle, go ahead.
I agree with this group. I think that to a different extent, we all believe that learning in and through the arts can have deep impact on students' lives, and that the knowledge and skills that they are developing, of course, is part of those goals. But in doing that, there's a bigger purpose to what we do that sometimes is a challenge to measure, that we believe that through the arts that they can have increased confidence and being able to communicate, that they'll have a different perspective on the world and be more, tolerant of different perspectives and able to see from different points of view. So I think that we all come with some of the same goals, but because we come from different art forms and being a museum, we have the ability that collectively we can have these deep and meaningful impacts through the state on children and their lives.
Thank you, Michelle. So one part of the goals, perhaps, or a follow-up to that would be, how do you integrate learning standards, either arts education standards or non-art standards, say in social studies, English language arts, math, science? How do you integrate that in your work with students? Or what are examples of that like? Okay, Sharon, go ahead. Hold on. Sharon's going to start us off.
I'm good at filling the void here. Well, I can speak in general. When you start looking at the standards, it's a prerequisite for any grant work that is done through us that you are able to make that connection, because again, to have meaningful exposure when you go out into the schools or the community, it has to relate to what's going on. And schools can make that connection if you are able to specify how you're going to benefit what they're trying to do for their students. So reaching out and saying, yes, I'm going to support your language arts skills. I'm going to back up those social studies experiences so that it has greater meaning for your students becomes essential in a successful program.
Great. Thanks. Thanks, Sharon. And Mike had his hand up, so I'm going to unmute Mike. Go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say that the curriculum standards, after being a part of or presenting in schools for a while, become second nature. And they have to become second nature because you can't go into a school with a bullet-pointed chart of standards and try and hit them all, because teachers and especially the students will realize that, oh, you're just trying to hit this number of standards. And so what I try and do in my work is insert quite a bit of what I say is sugar in the medicine. And so through making the work as involved and as exciting and explorative as possible, those standards are all integrated through the process, so that students aren't necessarily aware that they're getting this medicine with the sugar that they are intaking. The teachers are, because of the workshops that we've had specifically with the teachers beforehand, but the students aren't aware of it until the process is nearly over, and they can look back through the teachers, through questions and answers, and those kinds of sessions, to see that they've actually learned quite a bit of the standards, quote unquote, that they need. But in the end, what they've done is they've had a good time learning, and that's the point, is enjoying themselves enough so that they want more, so that their appetites aren't satiated, but they want more and more, and in fact are seeking these standards on their own, without teacher involvement, without artist involvement, so that they're going home and in fact perhaps teaching their parents or asking their parents to help them learn more about a particular subject.
I'm really pleased with a number of things that you said there. And I know when I was way back when I was getting my teaching degree, the sort of methodology in creating lesson plans was list as many as you can. Arts education, ELA, social, like whatever, like you got more points the more you were integrating. But we definitely know that that's not real integration. That's just creating some sort of impressive list. And I like everything you said about authenticity, because then that allows you to leave the students with something so they do want more, and it's not just an exercise of filling some sort of requirement. Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Thank you, Mike. All right, so we're going to move on now to, and again, some of you kind of have mentioned this already, so you're welcome to come in and come out as necessary. But I'd like to give you all some time to talk about the programs that you're either currently working on or are working on in the future, sort of what's going on in the world of Mike Wiley and the Museum of Art and the Carolina Ballet and the Symphony. So I'm going to just put that question out there and raise your hands out in the virtual world, and anybody here can get started. What programs are you working on now or in the future? Okay, Michelle, I see your hand. I'm unmuting. Go ahead, Michelle.
One of the projects that we've started this year is a virtual field trip. I think nothing replaces the idea of going to an art museum and seeing works of art in person, but it's a challenge to bring everyone from the state here. So this is a need that several teachers have expressed interest in. One of the projects that we're currently working on is, instead of just doing a virtual field trip in the galleries, actually taking students into the conservation lab. We are in the process of dismantling a classic sculpture and then putting it back together again. And in the process, there's some really high-tech technologies and things that I'm unable to talk about right now, but it's really a great intersection for science, technology, engineering, STEM, and we're looking forward to virtually being able to bring students into a place that, even if they came to the museum, that's a place that's sort of off limits, that they can really go inside and see this work in action.
Yeah, I like that idea of the behind the scenes. It's almost what I think we were talking about one of our meetings at the museum, was this idea of the fear of missing out. Can kind of be something that can draw people in, but also this sort of forbidden idea that you get to go behind the scenes and see what the sculpture is like when it's under the microscope and it's getting sort of repaired. That's really cool. All right, Sharon, go ahead.
I was just going to say real quickly, that brings to mind, Michelle, thank you for saying that, because all of you have mentioned different aspects of the arts that are also offering students awareness of alternate careers in the arts, the technical side, the production side, all those things that they may not even think of, but as they move through their lives, by exposing them to what you do in very varied aspects, you've given them an opportunity to think outside the box.
Brilliant.
Right. That's a really good point, Sharon. The idea that there are these career elements in arts education, arts integration, but also in arts exposure, and making that explicit to sort of the kids, the students, and the teachers, honestly, involved is a big part of what y'all do. Anybody else want to add to programs that they're currently working on, or even the idea of this new one, of the idea of careers and how it's related to your work? Sarah, I see your hand, so I'm going to mute Michelle, and I'm going to unmute Sarah. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yes, a couple of programs I'll mention. Wanted to echo what Michelle said, that nothing can really replicate the live experience, in my case with music, live performances. But we are in the process of piloting a virtual education concert experience. So that won't take away from all of the education concerts that we perform every year by traveling all across the state, but we're looking at offering an online experience for that as well. And then also, certainly a lot of arts organizations and schools work with sensory-friendly programming in the area, and nationally and internationally. And so we've been doing a lot of research on sensory-friendly programming and becoming more accessible as an organization. And so in the next couple of years, we'll be piloting some programs in that area as well.
Sarah, are you working with Arts Access with that at all? I'm just curious.
Yes, we are. Mm-hmm. The Wake County Arts Inclusion Project, and just offering some opportunities to learn from their expertise and attend some of their workshops.
Perfect. Excellent. All right, I see Mike's hand. Thank you, Sarah. Mike, I'm going to lower your hand. Go right ahead, Mike. Oh, wait, I didn't unmute you. Sorry. I put your hand down, but I didn't unmute you. Go ahead, Mike. Sorry about that.
A new thing that I'm incorporating this year with Cartwheels is a performance called Tired Souls, and that is about the Montgomery bus boycott. The reason that I've added it to availability through residencies and performances is, again, looking at the country as a whole, socially as well as politically, and helping students to understand what is happening historically right now with Tired Souls, and understanding the Montgomery bus boycott and how young adults, children their age, teenagers and women played such an intricate role in that tremendous bus boycott that in many ways kicked off the civil rights movement, because of what's happened with the students in Parkland, and because of what's happening nationally with more women running for office than ever before. Students need to understand that this isn't a new place in history. What it is a continuation of what we've been working toward as a society, as a whole. Students as activists, students as intricate community members making their mark, not seeing youth as a hindrance, but actually seeing their youth as a way to stand up unabated, as well as the women that were involved in pushing those individuals, so that the narrative that they have been learning for so many years, that Rosa Parks was just an elderly woman who sat down on the bus because she was tired, or that Martin Luther King was the only person involved in that boycott, they now get an opportunity to learn and become a part of the true history, and that is that it was a student-led in many ways, and incited by women in the movement.
Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate that. So it is 10 o'clock. We said we're going to be here till 10:30. We have 2 questions left. But one of these particularly can be some of the longer answers we receive when we've done this before. And that's just to get you to think about what your favorite sort of stories are about arts exposure, either, kids coming to your institution, or your institution going out to schools, or teaching artists going into schools. It could really run the gamut here, but this is, I think, there are probably multiple stories that you could each come up with. But what are some ones that come to mind as we've talked about arts exposure today? Okay, Lisl? Yes, go right ahead.
I had mentioned our program Dancers in Schools, where Carolina Ballet had 2 of our principal or 2 of our dancers. One was a soloist, actually, and one was a corps member, present in the area schools for 1st through 5th graders. It's a 45-minute program where they talk about how they became dancers and what a professional dancer's day looks like, and etc. We generally pick a female and a male dancer for this program, and this year our male dancer pick was an African-American male dancer that's been with our company for 3 years now, and it was wonderful for me to see the connection that this young man made with the students, in particular the male young boys. Mm-hmm. And they came up to him afterwards with such admiration, and one of them said to him, "I never knew that someone of my race could actually be a dancer." Wow. And we all just sort of got very emotional with that, but it was wonderful for these boys to see what they could become in the arts, and so I was very proud of Carolina Ballet to present that sort of diversification in the arts. That was a very emotional moment for us. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I haven't cried yet in one of these webinars, but we still have 30 minutes left. Do your best, everybody. All right. How about Sarah, Mike, or Michelle, or Sharon here? Anybody else would like to talk about a story about arts exposure with related kids? All right. I see Mike's hand up. All right. I'm going to get this in the right order this time. Mike, you are ready to go. Go ahead.
Well, I'm going to piggyback on that regarding race as a way to enter the lives of folks that may not necessarily see themselves in the arts, or necessarily see their place in the world. And there have been a few incidents, again, because oftentimes my partner Howard and I we're the only African American seen in some of these communities, or certainly as a professional in the school system, whether the school system has a number of African American students or whether the school system has little to no African American students. It depends on what part of the state. I remember once we were in a school where when we walked in, we found ourselves being followed. We found ourselves being followed and then watched as we conducted the workshop. We were watched by the principal, and then the principal grabbed another teacher, and that teacher grabbed another teacher, and the principal was African American, and the two teachers were also African American. And the reason we found out afterwards wasn't that we were doing something negative. It's that in that particular school, they had no African American males, no African American male teachers, no staff that at all. And so therefore for them, this was a really, really wonderful way for these students to learn from African American males and see African American males in a different light than perhaps they were either reading in the newspaper or seeing on television news. And so therefore there was a situation where this female principal and her counterparts were hoping to bring us back year after year so that their students could be influenced, or at least see and have conversations with African American professional males. Another instance was in Eastern North Carolina recently, and Sharon could actually speak a little to this as well. We were at a place called Tar Heel Challenge. Tar Heel Challenge is a program for high school students that are kind of at the end of the line. They could either go to jail or they could choose this military-like program that is in partnership with both the state and the National Guard. In a sense, it's a residency program and a military school where students can get their GED or high school equivalency over the course of 5 months. And by 5 months, I mean 5 months of living on a campus, only seeing their families a couple of times, and not having access to social media or cell phones or even television outside of what they are given. It truly is a way to take them out of gang situations and neighborhood violence throughout the state here on one campus. And these are, quote, the hardest of the hard students. And it was probably the most successful week-long residency I've ever had, because these students had an opportunity to see themselves in me, see themselves in my partner, and then write about themselves. And on the very last day of the program, they read poetry that they had written about themselves. And in this particular exercise, it's just an I wish prompt. I wish, and they are to list just 5 items that they'd wish for that weren't necessarily for themselves. Now, oftentimes when we do this particular I wish prompt, we go into schools and students will wish for money, or they'll wish for items for family members and that kind of thing. These young men wished for an end to gang violence in their neighborhoods. They wished that a cousin or a brother that had been shot and killed to be happy in heaven. They wished for a number of things like that. And in the end, these quote unquote hardest of the hard guys started weeping. They started weeping while reading their poetry, and instead of stopping reading, or instead of rejecting the emotion that was welling, one guy would then put his hand on the shoulder of another guy to help him finish reading what he was reading. And another guy would come over and put his hand on the shoulder of the guy that had his hand on the shoulder of the other guy. And suddenly you've got this cluster of, 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old men holding each other, supporting each other while reading their words out loud, their wishes and their hopes and their dreams for one another. And it was probably the most emotional viewing of work that I've ever seen come out of these residencies. And in the end, I decided this is a graduation that I would like to come back to, that I would like to see these young people walk across the stage and get something that's so hard to achieve, even in the best of conditions. So that's one thing I'll never forget, and I will always strive to accomplish in the work that we do.
Right. So what a story. But the thing I find really fascinating, I love that y'all are just teaching me so many things I was not expecting to talk about here today. And one of those is we often think in terms of like what we do for the kids. We don't think about what the kids do for us. And it sounds like in a very real way that you made a connection with those young men. And that's great. Sharon, did you want to add something to that about that program, or?
Well, I do. I remember that story with Mike, and you never know who you're reaching and in what capacity. And I think that story illustrates that beautifully. And I know that Mike and his work does that over and over for these kids. I can list multiples every year of artists coming back and telling me stories about what happened to them as they've gone out into the counties. Real quickly, for example, we have a flamenco group that travels with cartwheels, and they use a lot of the vocabulary is in Spanish, and they'll look up, and all of a sudden this one Spanish-speaking student who has very little relationship to his peers becomes the rock star because he understands the vocabulary and no one else does. Or we have another group in cartwheels, John Brown. He's a fabulous jazz artist. Who, interestingly enough, became a musician after being exposed to jazz in a residency. He cites that as the beginning of his career, and he, like Mike, went to a far western rural county and had a student come up to him and ask him if she could touch him because she had never been with an African-American man before. And by the end of the residency, he was her hero. He was getting hugs. It changed that child's life on a very intimate level. In addition, we had a rural county in the southeast part of the state where the students walked in to see a cartwheels performance as part of the residency. It was the first time they'd ever seen a red curtain in a stage. So showing them that there's something beyond their intimate experience of their lives, that there are other things in the world, is valuable as well. A residency in Johnston County last year, a visual arts residency, where a muralist was there and noticed this beautiful light coming down the hallways. And instead of a specific painted mural becoming their project, they began experimenting with light and science and created work on the actual windows so that the light would move throughout the day and give them a meaning in a different way. Black Box Dance has told me about being in counties where schools are heavily infused with military families, and these families are dealing with long absences and PTSD and those kinds of issues, and bringing in those students and families to allow them to express their feelings about that life and those experiences. One of my favorite ones also, and then I'll quit, is a student who happened to be involved in Poetry Out Loud, which is another one of our issues, but he had also been involved in a poetry residency, and he actually wrote his college essay about how poetry had impacted his life and is now a junior at Harvard University. Wow. So all those things are just stories that fuel your heart, make you know that what you're doing has meaning and is also meaningful to those that you interact with.
Great. Thank you so much, Sharon. Anybody else? Just raise your hand. Favorite stories about arts exposure, kids going to an institution, teaching artists coming to schools. Mm-hmm. All right. So last question here, and we're at 10:15. We're sort of getting close to the end here, is what do you think contributes to a successful grant that's run by a panel? This is always, we have so many people in our community that I think are really interested in this. It seems a little bit of like a mysterious process. Maybe we can demystify that with our group sort of our group effort here. And just raise your hand. What do you think contributes to a successful grant? Okay, Lisl, sorry.
Well, a couple of points. Make sure that it fulfills the basic requirements, that the needs are a good match for the grant. And something in particular that I learned watching our development department is that the grant really needs to be written in a compelling manner to really spark an interest and that there's a sort of a willingness to want to go ahead and do the grant and make that collaboration.
Sharon, Sarah, or Mike, what do you think about this mysterious process of grants? How can we help people with that? Sharon, okay.
I can add a bit to what we already said previously. We mentioned how important planning is with all participants, that's such an important part. You want buy-in, you want passion, you want excitement, and that should be evident in your application. Also, that need, as we mentioned earlier, for ongoing communication. How are you planning for that? What are your curricular connections so that it has deep meaning for participants and teachers? But I think one of the things that I've seen in the most powerful grant applications that just make you, like Slater said, almost weep when you read them, that long-term impact. What is going to happen after this residency has ended? Is there a lasting effect? Is there a potential change? Is there learning that has occurred for all participants that will be carried forward in what happens next?
Thank you so much. All right, so unless our virtual panelists have anything to add, I think we have really answered all the questions. If there's something that you think I should have asked or something that maybe you just wanted to say, before we sort of close out here, just let me know as you're thinking about that or raising your hand or winking. I just want to thank you all so much. I know Michelle said she had to get out a little bit early today, so she has left, but I really appreciate it because we are all so very busy. But the stories that y'all have told and the expertise that you have sort of lent to our teachers and our teaching artists and our arts educators and our students and everybody involved, administrators, I think this is going to be really, really useful. I often think sometimes the best thing that I do at DPI is bring good people together and just let them do their thing. And y'all have absolutely far exceeded my expectations, and I really, really appreciate your time and everything that you've said today. So unless you have something to say or add, just let me know. I will close this webinar on down, and what I'll do again is I'm going to edit and combine with another webinar that we've done. We will post it on our website. If you want to have a copy of what we've done, just reach out to me. That's easy enough just to send you a link or a file, and you're welcome to use it. Anything that we do at DPI is for the state or anybody to use as they see fit. But thank you again so much for coming. Thanks to Lisl. It was nice to get to meet you, and Sharon for coming today. And thanks to Mike and Sarah and Michelle for tuning in virtually. Hope y'all have a great, great day, and we'll see you another time maybe. We should do this again.
Yes.
All right. Thanks.